Early access, just to touch on, it's becoming increasingly popular. Baldur's Gate 3, obviously the poster child for a success story coming out of early access, but so many great games, Manor Lords that just came out, Hades 2 that just came out. I think increasingly developers and players are embracing this model where the audience that's most enthusiastic has an opportunity to play the game, and their feedback really shapes the direction of the game before it goes to that full 1.0 launch.
That was Tim Morton, the founder of Frost Giant Studios, talking about how early access has become such a standard part of PC game publishing. I think we all take it for granted. We take Steam for granted, but there was definitely a time when that all didn't exist. Do you remember that long ago?
Yeah, it was like you couldn't mess up.
You and I were talking earlier. We were talking about which quote to kind of put at the beginning, and that quote reminded me of a story. It's a marathon story from 1994. The first marathon game that we did. This was the first one. So all we had done before this was the little, Operation Desert Storm combat clone that I did, the Minotaur game, which was like modem only, which Jason did, and this Pathways into Darkness game. So we were not really on the radar so much. We were working on Marathon, and we were talking to Apple about it. I think they were helping us with something. I think they were helping us with the render loop or something. But we sent them a build, like a private build, like an FTP. This was back when it was FTP sites. There was no, Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever. So we sent them a build, and it ended up leaking. Somebody, I can't even remember how this happened, but somebody at Apple either put it on a public FTP
like
site, or it got cracked or something, but it got out. And at first we were like, oh my gosh, our world is ending. This is horrible. People liked it. And it was obviously
it's early
data.
Access. I see what you're saying.
That was early access for us, and we didn't choose it, but
it wasn't done right. Did you have like all the levels in there?
Oh no, it was total beta. It had lots of problems and bugs, but
interesting.
I think people knew that, so there was no expectations, but it offered something. The promise of something interesting, and I think it got a lot of people excited. And I think that's kind of the spirit of what early access is all about. But it just reminded me back in the day how I think we backed into getting lucky on something that we thought was going to be horrible.
I could see how that could be, but it doesn't work with every game though, right? Like I downloaded a game recently. I'm not going to say the game, and I only got early access to support them, and it's not Stormgate. This is a different game. It's a story. It's like it has like a narrative, And I started playing it, and I'm like, this game. I thought the game was done. I didn't know it was early access, and I was like, this isn't that good. And then I found out, they're not. They're like 25. Like they're not even that far. I don't know what the percentage is. Is there like a percentage before you can go into early access? Like does Steam approve it? Like do they go, okay, this is far enough, and does it have to go through an approval process? Because I don't know.
Yeah, I believe so.
Because there's other early access games I'm on that feel done, but they're not. And then they do the patch notes and stuff, and that's kind of cool. So I guess are you looking this up right now?
Oh, God, I got busted. It
is a way to fund the project, too, and also fix bugs. And there's a lot of benefits, but I don't know if it's for everybody. I don't know if I want to do it all the time, do the early access stuff. Like sometimes you want it to be done. Like I know people when I lived in LA, they would go to these they would have like these screenings for movies that weren't done. Do you remember that? It happened across the street at the ArcLight.
Yeah.
There was always like a long line of people waiting to get in. And that's like a whole culture of people that just like they do their date night on these movies that aren't done. And there's like stubbed in scenes and like they just want to see what it feels like, and then you do the questionnaire. So yeah, I kind of like watching it when it's done. Like, but some games I can see, like I could see this game because they're testing like mechanics and balancing, and I think it makes a lot of sense for this game. but not for like, I don't know, like Resident Evil 1. I don't think I'd want to play in early access, you know?
That makes sense. That makes sense. But Tim's been on a pretty incredible journey before Frost Giant was basically running the Starcraft franchise over at Blizzard. This incredible pedigree and through line of real-time strategy, bringing it to the modern age.
And early access too.
You were in on the Kickstarter, right?
Yes. And it's a fantastic game. So it's like what you just said is like, you know how StarCraft, they would probably test with like a limited amount of people, right? And then their QA team. And early access is like everybody. So I can imagine they're getting way better data, you know? And it's a very competitive game. And like, so it makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
And if the game is constantly changing, like I think the community like is like supplementing it, you know?
For a game like that, that'll live and die on the balancing and the just how the economics of gameplay actually work, like having it out in the real world for a little bit of time to collect all that feedback. Super, super helpful. We had a great conversation with Tim Morton. Super cool, super chill. Enjoy our conversation with Tim, and we'll catch you on the other side. Welcome to the show, friends. Today we are chatting with Tim Morton, the CEO of Frost Giant Studios, where he is bringing RTS back, baby, just like Justin Timberlake.
I backed the Kickstarter, by the way, and I've played it.
Thank you.
I was going to say, Aaron and I were both super fans of what you're doing, have backed the Kickstarter. I think you're on an important mission here, Tim. Everybody's counting on you. We want our RTS.
Oh, it's authentic, by the way. I logged in. And I was destroyed in about a minute and 37 seconds. I was like, oh, so it's a real RTS competitive game. I get it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We do have a co-op mode, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I know. It's like, oh, I got to play for real.
Aaron and I are going to need it. But Tim's history in games, pretty impressive, having managed production of the StarCraft franchise at Blizzard. So, you know, he's got some RTS chops. And in the Wayback Machine, started and ran Savage Entertainment for, I think this must have been for over a decade. So a good portion of your career. So, Tim, welcome to the show. It's great to see you.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me. Yeah, super excited to be here.
So I think I was on your site and looking at kind of like the founding team that you have put together. And it seems like a lot of the crew from the Blizzard days. Is that right?
It is. Yeah, we started Frost Giant with the core group that had continued on with Starcraft II, even past Legacy of the Void into the transition to free play and all of the post-launch content that we did. But obviously we've built upon that foundation now, and there are lots of folks from other companies besides Blizzard who have joined the team as well.
How big is the team now?
We are a little over 50 internally, and then there are a bunch of contract folks who help us out around the world as well.
Let's go back in time a little bit. I don't know if this is a fair assumption, but since you started at Blizzard, have you been mostly working in the RTS space?
My first experience working on RTS was actually at Electronic Arts on what was meant to be a sequel to Command & Conquer Generals.
Oh.
And
Okay.
yeah, spent a few years on that one, actually developing in the Frostbite engine, which was interesting, trying to adapt a shooter engine to real-time strategy, and certainly kind of paved some thinking for working in Unreal now.
Hey, when you say
Frostbite.
Interesting, is that like one of those friendly words? Is that like
Guilty as charged? Yeah.
Okay, but so all right, so that to give you some lessons because you're building in Unreal, is that right?
We are, yes. And yeah, that's both got some wonderful upsides, but also some obvious challenges when it comes to this genre.
Interesting challenges.
We experience that sort of interesting on a daily basis. Right there with you. But so Command & Conquer's Generals, sequel to Generals, which one was Generals? I played a lot of early Command & Conquer, so like through Red Alert, and actually Red Alert's sort of like in my top 5 of all time. But yeah, was Generals I know they did one where you could actually control individual units. Was that Generals, or was that a different one?
The original Generals, I guess I should talk about first, was one of my favorite CNCs, just in that it was set in sort of an alternative version of Earth where there's a European faction, there's a China faction, and there's a terrorist faction called the GLA that wasn't any real country, but obviously kind of tapped into the vibe of being terrorists. And
that one had the little like pickup truck with the people on the back, and they would throw like Molotov, and then they would like crash and like,
exactly, yeah. And the workers had no shoes, and it was sort of not politically correct in today's environment, but at the time it was meant to be satirical. So that game had been developed by another team inside Electronic Arts, and so we were working on a sequel to that one.
That was your first RTS that you worked on.
Can we go back a little bit more?
What was your first game you played, or did you grow up like in an Atari household? Did you have an Apple II? Are you way younger than that and you grew up with a 486? What's the deal?
I think my first video game probably was in an arcade, like probably I don't know, Space Invaders, Asteroids era. But like at home, we had the Atari system that had Pong, Breakout, and I feel like there was one more. There were 3 games, but so on to Atari 2600.
So you had an Atari system before the 2600? Was there one before that?
Yeah, it's kind of an integrated unit with a paddle that lets you play Pong. So
you don't still have that, do you? Like kick around in the basement somewhere?
Yeah, sadly, I don't still have that one.
Okay, so you had an Atari pre-2600, then you got a 2600 as well?
I did, yeah. And
so things must have been pretty good in the Morton household growing up. Like where was this?
Exotic, New Jersey.
Right on. Okay. I grew up in the East Coast, so like where in New Jersey?
A little town called Ridgewood, kind of North Jersey, outside Manhattan.
So right across the Hudson. Like Tappan Zee or George Washington?
I mean, for going to the city, obviously the George Washington, but spent some trips driving over the Tappan Zee as well. But I think I suspect we're similar vintage. So grew up when video games were just emerging, and played such a big part of my childhood, even going to arcades, which is so much less common today. But just those early consoles. And past that, I was actually a ColecoVision guy, if you remember.
Hey, yeah.
Wow. So wait, hold on a second here. Yeah, the pre-26 console, then the 2600, then a ColecoVision?
Then a ColecoVision. I think I skipped some other console, and certainly as things continue to evolve, I was more of an IBM guy, which just not a gaming platform. Really, we had like 4 different colors in CGA, and just envy every time I visited somebody who had a Commodore 64. But
you ended up with an IBM PC in the house. Did you take to it programming wise or something else?
I did. Yeah. No. Zork was like the first PC game that I played, and just thinking back to those Infocom boxes with the tchotchkes that came with them, it was such a cool sort of mixed physical and digital experience. But I think adventure games felt kind of accessible to make with BASIC. And so I did start just as a hobbyist engineer doing interpreted BASIC stuff, because interpreted BASIC, came with the box. So
were you doing the thing where you get the magazines that have like code and then you code the game yourself?
Yeah, Byte magazine was one of those, but yeah, absolutely. And there were books, and I remember learning where, I would type stuff in out of a magazine or out of a book, and I would not be sure what I had done wrong when things didn't work right. And you go through this whole, is having 2 spaces instead of 1 space a problem? You don't understand time in the development of games that it was possible for a kid with their PC to write a game that was similar to these successful commercial games like Zork. Like writing a text adventure feels so much more accessible than developing Fortnite. there's so much more that goes into 3D development. And to be fair, it's incredible what Epic's done with their tool pipeline and with UEFN to make development still accessible to people who are coming into games today. But it does feel like a bigger set of knowledge that's necessary than just writing a text adventure back in the 80s.
Yeah, it is really interesting how all of that has kind of evolved and developed. But really interesting to hear you talk about how you learned how to program, because I think we've heard this from a bunch of people, and I've had the same experience myself, where you see a piece of code and you type it in. You're not making stuff up, you're just repeating. And then you're getting the feedback. You can get the feedback from the computer that it either worked or it didn't. And if it didn't, actually, sometimes that's more useful, because then you have to actually figure out where the mistakes were. It's almost like how you learn a language. Somebody says something to you, says, repeat this. And you just repeat it and you don't know really what it means. And they tell you how, and the more you repeat it, the more you learn what it means. And I think a lot of people find things like language or programming inaccessible, but that kind of approach that we all went through at the beginning, that's a way to get into it. So I think that's pretty cool.
What happened after that? So you're making games. Did you go to college to learn this, or?
Yeah, I did study computer science at UCSD, and it was nowhere near as much fun as writing your own games, because it's all these courses that they feel are important, combinatorics and assembly language, and all these things that don't necessarily have a direct purpose behind the class anyway. And you find out later on that assembly is really cool because it lets you do things at a more optimal way than you can do with a high-level language. And there are reasons why that knowledge is important. But at the time, learning that stuff without any real sense of application or purpose, I can't say I enjoyed it that much, but it certainly, paved the way to be able to make games professionally later on.
So you didn't want to do that in college? Like, did you think you were going to do something else, or were you like, I'm making games?
I don't think I understood that making games was an option. There wasn't this sense that there is today of degrees that you can take that prepare you for the game industry. I think going to school at that point in time, if you're studying computer science, you're probably going to wind up at like a Hewlett-Packard or an IBM. And I don't know if you guys remember this, and this, again, it's not going to make sense to anybody who's growing up today, but there was a lot of excitement at that point in time around interactive television. Like, there was this theory that cable TV was going to go interactive, and like Time Warner had spun up an interactive group called Twig for Time Warner Interactive. Like all of the big media companies were spinning up groups that were preparing for this revolution that was going to be interactive television. And I was like, well, that sounds like more fun to work on than whatever Hewlett-Packard or IBM. I was just picturing myself in a cubicle with fluorescent lighting, wearing a button-down shirt.
Yeah, and a tie. Oh my gosh.
Exactly. So I figured, entertainment plus computer, that sounds kind of interesting. So I was applying to companies like that, and I saw, I literally think it was an ad in the paper for a job at Activision in LA. And I was living in LA at that point, and like, Activision, oh my goodness. I mean, I played Pitfall endlessly growing up. That sounds
It's a good
amazing.
game.
Yeah. And I also then started exploring other game possibilities and interviewed at Westwood. So I ironically, I drove all the way out to Vegas, and I still remember the interviewer hitting me with questions about fast Fourier transforms. I was like fresh out of school, so this stuff was, still crisp in my brain. No way could I answer that interview question today. But yeah, it was very exciting. And he was talking about how they were going to make a sequel to a Dune game that they had worked on, and later realized that if I had landed that job, which I did not, by the way, they didn't call me back. Apparently my fast Fourier transform knowledge was not as good as I thought.
That always works, though, Tim. It always works.
But instead, I wound up getting an offer from Activision, and I got to go work on Return to Zork, which also, felt like there was some continuity there, since Zork was the first PC game that I played. But
so you did get your first job was at Activision.
Return to Zork. That's your first game, pro game. Return to Zork.
Yeah, but it's, some crazy things about Activision at this point in time. It's less than 50 people. It's been taken through bankruptcy, and it emerged as this new company. And there's literally one guy left from original Activision, and I think he was like 18 when Bobby and his partners bought Activision. So it's not like he was a senior dev or anything, but they relocated him from Northern California to Southern California. And the rest of this group, barely anybody there had ever released a game. So it's a bunch of people who literally don't know what they're doing, trying to figure out how to make games. And the few people who have released games are revered because of the sacred knowledge that they've got from having gone through this.
It's true.
It was amazing to me, and such a great opportunity to learn, to not be surrounded by people who had done this a million times, so that everybody was trying to figure things out as they went.
Do you remember anything particular from that project or those days that has stuck with you?
The crazy thing, that thing was written in interpreted Lisp. Maybe all Lisp is interpreted, but yeah, bytecode on the back end. And so there was sort of a technology team maintaining the language, and then the implementation team using it. And so I was on the using it side, and later got to move over to that technology team. But such an exercise in understanding the magnitude of assets and code that go into a game. I mean, you go through school and you write some utility functions, but having to deal with this whole app with just tons of visual assets, and the need to keep all of that organized, the need to have multiple people working on the same code base. I mean, it's just, that first, I think, engineering or development job out of school is such a huge learning experience. But you guys have probably gone through that too. So,
well, no, I mean, that is when you are coming up, I think even still today, if you're working on your own, like the burden on keeping things organized and usable by other people as you get into a professional setting it's not burden, but just the responsibility is like a real thing. I guess they're probably much better at sort of teaching that now that there are real game programs and people work in group projects. But I could totally imagine that being your first experience like that.
Yeah, well, and it's funny you mentioned that, because the kind of where things have gotten to today, just being in SoCal, I have an opportunity to meet some students from UC Irvine that has a games program, from USC that has a games program. And you're right, they are working on group programs, but I think they also are going through that challenge of figuring out how to structure it all, because they're not necessarily getting an org chart from an operating game company and replicating that with their class project. Like they still have to go through the motions of how do you break all this down and what's the right way to distribute the effort across the team. So I'm not even sure we've figured that out on the professional side yet.
I'm sure you learned a lot on StarCraft that have influenced how you're doing things on Stormgate, but I'm sure how you have it set up is very different today. And you're on a different engine at the very least, right?
Yeah. I on that note, I had this experience at one point in my career where I got pulled in to help out on an Electronic Arts project. It was one of the James Bond games, Agent Under Fire, that they had done. And I was so excited to go and bed at EA, because at that point, like 1 in every 4 games sold was an EA game. I'm like, I'm finally going to get to see the right way to make games. And I got up there, and this is not meant as a ding on EA. I think every company, struggles with these questions that we're talking about, but it was all of the same problems I had seen at every other game that I had worked on.
So true.
In some ways magnified because the teams were bigger, the budgets were bigger, but they were able to resource against solving these problems in a way that ultimately produced some good games. Like Agent Under Fire was a fun game to play, but it was kind of that revelation of nobody's actually figured this out.
Everybody's grass is not as green as you think it is.
Yeah, I actually think it's one of the joys of our industry is that every project is an opportunity to try something new, learn something new. Sometimes it's painful, but
I was going to turn a question back to you guys, though. So, here we are now, in my case, 30 years later, making a new project. It's still hard. Every game is hard. So maybe there's some, learning disability on my part. I'm not sure, but it feels like it should be easier after all of this time. And part of it is the tech keeps changing. Part of it is that the teams keep changing. The IP that we work on, even the genres, the business models, everything is always changing from underneath us. But yeah, this is making games is hard.
Making games is hard. I think some things have gotten easier and some things have gotten harder at the same time. So I think it's continued on this trajectory of difficulty level high. But we have an engine. You are using Unreal. I'm using Unreal. We don't have to write our own engine. So that whole a big portion of the unknown of when a feature was going to be done and how to sequence when things should be worked on, a big portion of that is removed. However, it's replaced by somebody else who's in control of your tech stack. So you have a whole new set of constraints that you might not have had, right? So there's things like that. You win something, but then something else is harder.
Yeah, and honestly, that's one of the things to love about it is, I'm not wearing a necktie in an IBM cubicle somewhere. We're challenged every single day with new things to learn and new situations to figure out how to navigate. And that keeps it very, very interesting and engaging.
Usually when it's really calm, and you don't have to learn anything, you should probably be a little scared. It's like, wait a second. Yeah, the shoe's going to drop.
It's nice to have those every once in a while, though.
Well, that's true. Okay, that's true.
So Activision, and then did I miss something between there and Savage, or is that when Savage got started?
And this is another sort of interesting industry phenomena that it was less than 50 when I started. They had some great successes. Even Return to Zork kind of landed when CD-ROMs were taking off.
Was that the MechWarrior 2 days as well?
And yeah, so I did work on MechWarrior 2, and that was an amazing experience. Just a really inspiring group of people that I got to work with, and being a 3D game, a whole lot of learning that came out of that. But I think as a company, Activision grew so much during that period, and by the time I left Activision the first time, at this beginning of my career, I think they had 7 internal dev teams, and it was getting to the point where they were doing external publishing deals with the id guys, with Nihilistic, if you remember Nihilistic. And, I think as internal teams, we were looking at the deals these external guys were getting, and we're like, well, we make games too. We should maybe think about going off and just starting our own game studio. And, no experience as an entrepreneur, no understanding of what it actually means to do that. But a couple of us, the Pandemic Studios founders, and myself and my co-founders at that point for Savage, struck out with Activision support, which was really cool. There are lots of bad things that get said about Activision, but both Pandemic Studios and Savage, the studio that I founded at that point, got bootstrapped by Activision and got our first publishing deals with Activision to go off and build those studios. And what an education that was. Just running a business, trying to do all the operational stuff, the strategic stuff, the biz dev. That's not why you start a game company. You start a game company to build games.
Well,
and holy cow is it's so important.
Yeah. I mean, did you end up liking that part of, having a studio, like the business part, or did you have somebody else helping you with that, or how did you set it up?
We very naively just figured, we would keep doing what we were doing as developers and hire some more developers and make great games. And immediately got a hard dose of reality that the publishing deal that we got was going to be a sequel to a game that was being developed internally at Activision. That game didn't perform, and nothing to do with our work, but we got canceled because you don't do a sequel to a game that doesn't perform.
Ouch.
Yeah, and literally for the next 12 years of existence of that company, we were just kind of in survival mode, and living from milestone to milestone, trying to find more work to replace the work that just finished. Like it's really tough being an external dev studio like that. And the dream, of course, was to do some original IP. And you look at the successes who are out there as independent studios that they had done that, but it takes capital and time to be able to do that, and we did not have that capital. So.
Yeah, but you made that work for 12 years.
Yeah, again, slow to learn. There's a theme, but
and how big was the studio at its peak? How big was that?
That studio grew to about 50 at its peak. And, at that point in time, individual teams were typically 20-ish. So, maybe 25, 30 as a bigger team. So we were working on multiple things at the same time, for some things for EA or THQ or Activision. It was all sort of developer publisher deals to keep that company going. But to go to the business and operational stuff, I think it was a great education in how important that is. And I'm betting that most of the listeners of the podcast won't have heard of Savage Entertainment, because all we did were these licensed games to stay in business. And meanwhile, Pandemic, who remember started at the same time, did manage to transition into doing original IP, from Destroy All Humans to Saboteur, Full Spectrum Warrior. Like that, they were starting to build their own games, and where we had grown to 50, they grew to about 500. And it really, like, the difference there was Pandemic had some very smart business thinking behind it. Josh Resnick, one of the founders, Wharton MBA, really smart guy. Like he was thinking strategically about how to scale that company. We were a bunch of developers who just wanted to make games at Savage. And, the importance of the business side supporting the creative side and supporting those aspirations that you have as a creator really just couldn't be underscored better by the difference in outcome for Pandemic, that ultimately, teamed up with BioWare and had a great exit to Elevation and then eventually to Electronic Arts, versus Savage, where we spent just the whole time struggling.
So it sounds like you took some of that to heart and have thought about it a lot. And I'm guessing the way that you set up Frost Giant reflects some of that thinking. Advice to somebody who might be thinking about starting a studio today, starting with some work for hire or having some work for hire in the mix is a great way to get some capital in the door without necessarily giving up equity. What do you think or imagine is the way to leverage that into some long-term equity value, some stuff that the company owns, like an original game or its own revenue stream or whatever?
Yeah, I think that there are studios out there, Way Forward springs to mind as an example, who build great businesses, doing publisher-funded development, who eventually are able to be successful enough with that to build some original IP and to self-publish some stuff. That is really hard. This ecosystem that has emerged of venture funds that will provide the capital for studios to build their first game has really changed things. And I believe that model is much superior to the traditional advance against royalty model that publishers use. In my experience, those 4-week, 6-week, 8-week, whatever the cadence is, those milestones that get enforced in a publishing contract inevitably force developers to make compromises in order to get paid. And getting paid is how you keep the team fed. It's critical. So, nobody sets out to make compromises, but as that milestone is looming, if you need to make compromises to hit the milestone and get paid, you're going to do that. And I feel like that's antithetical to building a great game. It just over and over again that those compromises stack up to the point where the end product is not about quality. It's about getting the final milestone check. And it doesn't mean that good games haven't been made and won't be made in the future in that model, but it's really hard versus venture-backed where you're still very motivated to make the most of the runway that you have to build your game, but you have the freedom to do that in a way that can be singularly focused on achieving your vision and achieving quality. So I'm a much bigger fan of this new and really, okay, Riot had venture funding, like there are examples along the way, but really 2018 is kind of where this ecosystem blossomed, and there was a proliferation of game funds that were investing in new studios. It's still challenging to get those deals, and I think those of us who came up with the industry and had resumes that cause us to be able to get those meetings have some advantage there. But, there absolutely are new teams that are getting venture funded. I'm a big proponent of this model.
Was there any games from the Savage era, no pun intended, that you enjoyed?
I would say Transformers. We did a couple of Transformers games that turned out okay. And we got to build tech and team culture. Like there were a lot of good things we built, but a lot of the games that we did just suffered for that structure that we talked about. I remember too, we'd visit the offices of the Pandemic guys, and they would have their like glowing quotes from reviews on the glass in their office, and meanwhile we would work on some of these licensed games that just didn't turn out the way that a developer would hope that they would. And so there was like a forum comment, I hope the developers die and this game is the last thing they ever, like,
Oh,
this
no.
was, so we were thinking, yeah, well, it turns out there are some people on the internet who aren't all that nice, but we were thinking we should etch those in our, office glass to motivate ourselves.
No, yeah, the internet could be a horrible place. All right. Well, so between Savage and between Frostgiant, you had like an entire career at Blizzard. How did you end up there?
Yeah, after Savage kind of fell victim to the death of THQ, we had a couple of big projects with THQ, and we just never were really able to rebound from losing that work. Spent a little time at EA on that Command & Conquer title I mentioned. That one, unfortunately, fell victim to kind of the Game of Thrones when John Riccitiello left and eventually got replaced by Andrew Wilson. But there were some strategic shifts, a lot of PC, and that game was meant to be free-to-play stuff. Yeah, did a short stint over at Sony Santa Monica. Really, really incredible team there. And then, got approached by Blizzard about coming in to take over StarCraft because that team was starting to shift their focus to Heroes of the Storm. And man, as a player who loves RTS games, StarCraft, well before I got there, so this is not me in any way patting myself on the back, like StarCraft was such an inspired game. Like I loved that game. And so getting an opportunity to come in a leadership role on a game that I already love as a player, that's already successful, that almost never happens in a career. And it was just too good an opportunity to pass up.
How did that happen? Like, Do you remember like what was the interview like? Or did you know somebody over there?
Yeah, I had worked with Dustin Browder at the beginning of Dustin's career. He was at Activision on some of the MechWarrior stuff, actually. And so it was a conversation with Dustin that led to that. And yeah, Blizzard, I mean, it was such a almost mythical place at that point in time. Just so many great games that had come out of Blizzard that were an important part of me growing up. So yeah, it was, I think still, even though things clearly have changed for Blizzard in the intervening years, still there's so many positive memories that all of us have from playing those games.
What year was this that you started?
Would have been 20, let's see if I'm going to get this right, 2014. So
2014, okay.
Paint the picture a little bit for us. Like what when you got there, what was it like? How big's the team? Were you like, did you know everybody because you were such a big fan and it was like, I can't believe I'm in the room with all these people?
Does modding exist at this point? The Starcraft II modding?
It does, yeah, and Warcraft III before it, of course, as well. But yeah, Star 2, interestingly, the same engineer that was involved in supporting modding for War 3 and Star 2. But yeah, I think definitely a little bit of, these are names that I've been seeing in the credits for these games that I've been playing all these years. So that was cool. The teams were somewhat combined, StarCraft and Heroes. So one of the things that I had to kind of push for early on was separation between those teams so that each product could succeed in its own set of goals. So that was a bit of a shift. And there's just this, I don't know if you guys have had this experience, coming into an established team in a leadership position is a very delicate thing. Like you don't just want to completely change everything. You don't want to be the big ego. So there is sort of an art and things that I had to learn about how to do that effectively and sensitively. But yeah, the thing that struck me the most about Blizzard at that point in time was it felt like working at a developer. It didn't feel like working at EA or what Activision had gotten to. Like this really, every other place, publishing and marketing called the shots. And at this place, publishing and marketing were service teams for the dev teams. And I had never seen that before. It really was very special.
I think that's pretty common for the super successful, high-performing teams that are building original stuff that's really resonating. Is the definitions, the defining moments of like what gets greenlit, what gets called done, what gets called, hey, time to go back to the drawing board and refactor, sort of gets driven from the creative side as opposed to the say the publishing side or the business side. That's my observation. So it sounds like Blizzard was certainly that way at the time. What was like when you got there? Was there anything like any mandate or mission you were given? Like, hey, this part is not going so well, so can you fix it? Or we just need to get done. Or the team splitting in half, so somebody's got to run this half. Like what was it? Anything?
Yeah,
like
there was some structural stuff like that. This maybe for you have worked on games that have had so many sequels. I think there was a portion of the team that was of the mindset of we just want to get this done so we can move on to the next thing. And they'd kind of lost some of that spark of how do we make this the greatest thing that we can possibly make it in the time that we have available. And so I think there was a little bit of navigating that and getting in some fresh blood to inject that just sense of aspiration. And it definitely came around to that. Like I really, I think that team did incredible work. Legacy of the Void was like the final installment of StarCraft II. And it leveled things up across the board, like the user interface, the competitive mode. It added a cooperative, like there's so much stuff that really was innovative about that release. So in the end, I think it turned out great. But there was that struggle at the beginning to get separation between the teams and to really inject that sense of aspiration, I think, to the product.
Did you go to Korea much? Like, was Star 2 like
That's a good question. I wanna
super
know.
big at the time you were there, like in the PC bonds in Korea?
Yes, though interestingly, still today, I think Korea would stack rank StarCraft I and Brood War above StarCraft II. But
Okay.
StarCraft is a cultural phenomenon in Korea in a way that I think it's hard for us to fully appreciate. I mean, it's almost on the level of like a Star Wars, where grandmothers who don't play video games know about the Zerg and Ultralisks, and you can talk to any taxi driver. Like, just StarCraft is so interwoven in the culture. It was on like primetime television, so it's hard to fathom. Yeah.
Did you go over there while you were working at Blizzard and sort of get an exposure to the gaming culture over there and this passionate part of the audience?
I did, yes. And even beyond StarCraft, I think Koreans are such consummate competitive gamers. Their influence as gamers has spread around the world, and it's so interesting to see their influence now in television and film and music similarly spread around the world. So yeah, I've really enjoyed getting to know Korea better, and have continued that relationship today with Frost Giant. We're very grateful. Yeah.
Let's talk about Frost Giant, and maybe there's a couple of really interesting things here. Like you were talking about, there's this new way to start of a game developer that's a little bit more long-term thinking, maybe more strategically oriented, where you're raising capital from the private market as opposed to as like a publishing partner, which you've done at Frost Giant. There's also been this whole season of MOBA that's come between StarCraft II and what you're doing today, which I think has kind of had a huge impact on player taste and just like what is popular. So what you're doing now is new again. Maybe. I don't know. That's a question, is like how you think about it. So both of those things, like how did this get started? Like, what was in your head on? I'm assuming both of those things. Like, I'd like to have a game studio again. I want to do it differently this time. I'm putting words in your mouth, but tell me if this is at all, if this is all in like the realm of correctness. I want to do it differently this time, and I think leaning into something that we have such strong expertise in could actually be fresh again. I don't know. That's kind of like my observation. Is that about right, or what was in your head when you got started?
A little nuance that I'll add, I guess. So if I could have, I would have loved to have built a new RTS at Blizzard. And I understand and honestly respect the business realities are that other genres have eclipsed RTS. And from a business perspective, it really does make sense to focus resources on things that produce the highest return. Like, if you're a public company like Blizzard, totally get it. Like, that makes sense. So recognizing that I'm passionate about this genre, I feel very attached to the community around RTS, not just esports, the whole community, but esports is a very important part of that community. I don't know if this has happened for you guys in games that you've worked on, but like I feel in some ways in service to that community, and so I don't want them to feel abandoned. Like, I want to keep interacting with those people. I want to keep providing content for that community that they love. If I can't do that where I'm currently working, like the obvious next question is, well, is there a way for me to do this outside? And I didn't actually realize that this whole ecosystem of game funds had come into existence. Like, I was working at a big publisher. I had no reason to be paying attention to that. But Dean Takahashi actually at GamesBeat was nice enough to send me a list of some of these companies that were funding studios, and I started just blindly reaching out on LinkedIn, and I think in some part, thanks to having Blizzard on the resume, they responded, and I managed to, almost to my surprise, honestly, managed to get a term sheet to be able to spin up a new studio to build a new game.
So basically, you sent a couple of emails around, and somebody sent you like a big fat check. Is that what you're saying?
I wish it were that easy.
Okay, but like you didn't necessarily start off on a mission to, hey, I think I want to start a studio and venture fund at this time. You were like, you started with, I really want to make a game, an RTS game. And looks like I can't do it here because just business strategy at Blizzard has changed. Maybe there's someone who can help me. And it was more sort of an idea that started with a game, basically, or a game idea.
Yeah, I was on a mission to continue RTS and to try to apply the lessons about how to build RTS in a way that makes the community happy to a new game. And so it really was about that. And starting a new studio was a means to that end. But you're right, it really was about the game. And to be fair, there were tons of unanswered emails, tons of rejections. It definitely wasn't.
People will be happy to hear that it wasn't like super easy, but well deserved, I would say. But did the MOBA thing go through your head? Were you at all like, well, nobody else, like everybody else is making MOBAs, maybe I should think about this more? Or was it the opposite?
It's going to sound terrible, but I'm going to say it anyway. I am somebody who loves the building aspect of RTS. And so a MOBA is like taking the things I love about RTS and deleting them.
Yeah. That was, we did this game Myth. I don't know if you ever played Myth, which was a strategy game. We called it a tactical game because you started with an army. You didn't build the army.
Clearly, MOBA has far eclipsed RTS. So like the things that they chose to focus on really appeal to players. And I think a key ingredient in their success has been the team-based nature, that it is inherently viral because you invite your friends. Having trouble saying that. Invite your friends to play, but also sticky because once they're there, they continue on in that ecosystem and you have a reason to stay. And RTS didn't have that as much. Like RTS historically was a more isolated experience. But what I saw on the back end at Blizzard was that this player base for RTS was incredibly stable for years, never left. And so all of this kind of theory crafting that you hear around MOBA replacing RTS, I knew that to not be true. MOBA absolutely eclipsed RTS in terms of audience size, but it's not that people stopped playing RTSs. People who love RTS stuck with it.
That's true.
Yeah. MOBA just kind of expanded an audience, but like there's still this big, enthusiastic RTS audience, and that makes total sense. I can totally see it. Are there things from like, you're talking about how mobile's a multiplayer or social experience that has teams and stuff like that. Are there aspects of that you're bringing to RTS? Is that part of the thinking too?
Yeah, it's a core part of the thesis for what we're building at Frost Giant. And I think it's important that we still enable players who love individual play to be able to play the game that way, but we're putting so much focus into supporting cooperative play in the campaign mode, cooperative as a standalone mode, and we're also going to do team-based competitive in a way that really is designed to support teams rather than just kind of an afterthought as it was in Starcraft. So hopefully a much better experience for team competitive when we release that in Stormgate 2. But yeah, I really believe if you look at the most popular esports today, almost all of them are team-based. Certainly, there's still Hearthstone, there's still fighting games, like 1 versus 1 competitive still matters. And for RTS, I think it's such a signature part of the genre. But The genres that have exploded in popularity do have a degree of social virality to them.
That's super cool. So the team, it's about 50 folks. Are you have us you do have an office because you're in it in Orange County?
Everybody's there?
We're about 50-50. So around half the team works out of the office 3 days a week in Irvine, and then half the team is fully distributed.
And so I know you did a Kickstarter because I'm in it. So how does that relate to see and I think we kind of talked about it without explicitly saying it. When you started the company, you did raise some venture financing. And then you did the Kickstarter. How do those two things relate to each other? Like, was the investment designed to get you to a certain point, and now you're hitting early access, etc. Will there be
Yeah.
a publisher? Are you self-publishing? Like, how does that part all work?
Yeah, no, we were extremely fortunate to raise the capital through venture that we did when we did. So, yeah, we did a seed round and then an A round, and that got us enough capital to get the game through launch, through early access launch, and that is such a blessing to not have to worry about that funding. We get it to the point where the game is in players' hands, and they kind of decide its fate from there. So the Kickstarter was less about trying to raise capital, more about a couple of things. One, providing a physical collector's edition. We had gotten a lot of requests for that. Blizzard obviously has a long tradition of physical collector's editions. So that was a way for us to accomplish that. But it was also a way for us to give people an opportunity to get into the beta through supporting the game, because we got a lot of requests to participate in the beta, and server development being what it is, you can't just open the floodgates and let everybody in. So this was a way to facilitate that.
So you are the publisher. You are the de facto publisher.
Yes, we are self-publishing in the West. We're going to work with publishing partners in Asia and possibly some other parts of the world that are emerging markets. But I think going back to those past experiences working with publishers, just having agency, not just over how the game gets built, but also how the game gets presented to players. Early access, just to touch on, it's becoming increasingly popular. Baldur's Gate 3, obviously the poster child for a success story coming out of early access, but so many great games, Manor Lords that just came out, Hades 2 that just came out. I think increasingly developers and players are embracing this model where the audience that's most enthusiastic has an opportunity to play the game, and their feedback really shapes the direction of the game before it goes to that full 1.0 launch. And it's not for everybody. Like, not all players are gonna be tolerant of an early access game, but we're certainly seeing huge value out of the player feedback that we're getting so far, and I'm eager to get to that early access step.
Do you have any idea how long you will be in early access? I'm just curious, like, how you think about that part of the process before pre-launch. I mean, before you actually go 1.0.
Yeah, I hope to spend at least a year in early access before we get to 1.0. I think some people have done shorter, some people have done longer, and we'll tune that time as we see the feedback that we get. But I want to make sure that we get from where we are today, which is hopefully showing the promise of a game that can live up to the legacy of Blizzard RTS. But Blizzard clearly had a lot more years and a lot more resources than Frost Giant has. And so going from early access to 1.0 is a chance for us to really focus in, polish in the way that Blizzard games are polished. And so we want to get it out there, but then level up over that next year.
Total dev time from the very beginning to release.
Yeah. So we started the company in the second quarter of 2020, but the team didn't really start until the third quarter of 2020. So there's sort of a question of, where do you start the clock ticking? But yeah, I roughly, I guess roughly 4.5 years to get to what I envision as the 1.0, which for what it's worth, StarCraft II did take longer, but we have the benefit of starting with an engine, Unreal, starting with a team that has a lot of experience. So I think we can be a little bit more efficient. But
can you tell from the folks that are like backing you or have been entering your community, are there younger folks who maybe grew up on League or maybe even grew up after, got into games afterwards?
Or no League,
like, hey,
right?
well, I want to check this out. This looks like my kind of thing.
there's a little bit of a generational thing going on, I think, where parents or older siblings have brought new players into the genre, but you're right that RTS players tend to be our age, and we're hoping that adding these social features really encourages more of that. Like the co-op mode in StarCraft II unexpectedly became a huge factor for new players coming into the game, where their friend is like, come try this out, I'll carry the map, don't worry about it, you can just kind of putter around and figure things out. And I think having on-ramps like that aren't just jumping into 1v1 competitive and getting stomped on over and over again.
Over the course of an hour-long build. Yeah.
Exactly. But I did want to say sincere thanks to both you guys for supporting the Kickstarter and to everybody else out there who supported us. I think it's so just motivating to the team to know that there are people out there who support what we're doing, who do care about this genre. And it maybe sounds silly, knowing that there have been these huge successful games like StarCraft II, but as a new studio building a new universe, you don't know if there's an audience out there for it. And so, the Kickstarter was just a huge motivational boost for all of us. And we are doing things that I hope will welcome the next generation of RTS players. We're doing things that I hope will attract MOBA players to try RTS and kind of graduate to dealing with macro and apply those skills that they got with single unit micro and with the camera system that works differently than many other genres. Like MOBA players have a head start learning a new RTS. So I'm really hopeful that we will start to expand the concentric rings of audience. I have a feeling 1.0 is the right place because it'll have that polish. It'll have the tutorial effort that's really focused on those new players. But the more the merrier, and the sooner they come, the better. So
that's awesome.
Right on. Well, thanks, Tim, for hanging out with us. We kept you. You're going to be a little late to your 11 o'clock. Apologies there,
No
but
worries.
It was pretty awesome to get to chat. I wish you all the best with the game. Take your time, get it right. But like you said, the sooner the better. And we'll be right there first in line. Hit that download button.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for the support and for having me on. It was a lot of fun to talk through all these memories. So.
Yeah, right on. All right. Well, cool. And we'll see you around.
Cheers, Tim.
All righty. Well, I'm even more excited for Stormgate now.
I want to play the story mode. That's what I'm excited about. That's what I liked about StarCraft.
Classic.
Yeah, and it's like heroes. When I read that, I was like, oh man, they could probably do a story mode for each hero. I don't know how they're doing it. I'm only guessing.
Yeah. So I'm in the Kickstarter, but I haven't actually started playing yet because I kind of like you. I wanted to kind of wait a little bit. I didn't realize it was going to be like he said another year, like a whole year.
Isn't that crazy? Huh? Dude, I can't even imagine where it's going to be.
What can you play so far? Is it just a multiplayer right now?
Yeah, there's 2 factions. Last I checked, there was 2 factions you could play, and I think it was 2. And I got my butt kicked over and over. And I was like playing with my friend and I actually, when that happens, like I wasn't mad. I was actually very happy about that because there's a lot of games you could play where they balance it, where the rubber banding is very, very, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Where it feels like, you know what? Like, is it worth investing here? Because I'm never going to get that far out of the rubber band.
Exactly right.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
So you could totally see like, oh, okay, if I knew all the bindings really well and I could probably last another 30 seconds at least.
Single player RTS though, that is, I mean, man, I spent a lot of time in Red Alert. I spent a lot of time in Plants vs. Zombies. Like that whole micromanaging I don't know, that scratches an itch for me.
Yeah, I like that too. I like the build process the best. That's my favorite. Like building up. That's one of the reasons I don't play StarCraft anymore is because I started getting really upset where you build a really cool base and then some guy just comes in and just kills everything. It's like everything was organized so nice, like it's like a cat knocking a milk off.
A cat knocking over your coffee mug. That's the worst.
Did he say anything about AI?
No.
AI never came up. That's interesting. I wonder if they're doing anything with AI, like maybe like their multiplayer.
I bet they have bots.
Oh no, they have the helper thing.
Oh yeah. You just don't have a very good memory.
Probably not.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening this week. Just a quick heads up that we will in a few weeks be releasing one of our special episodes. Aaron and I have talked about heading off to GDC. And we've put together kind of a cool insight into what it's like to go to the conference, what the game development community is like, and the few different perspectives. So keep your eyes peeled and your ears open for that episode, which will be dropping in a few weeks.
It's a little artsy.
Artsy craftsy.
It's a little artsy craftsy.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us again. We'll see you next time.
All right. See you later, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Fourth Curtain Podcast. The Fourth Curtain is a production of Fourth Curtain Media with community management by Doug Zardman. Lovingly edited and mastered by Brian Hensley at Noise Floor Sound Solutions in Chicago. To get a peek at upcoming episodes or to send in questions to the show, visit our site at thefourthcurtain.com. And be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.